Hello and welcome to Lecture 8. In this lecture, we'll learn about the role of ethical culture and relationships in business ethics. At the end of this lecture, you'll be able to gain knowledge on the role of corporate culture in ethical decision-making, understand interpersonal relationships, its different ways to influence decisions about ethical issues, and how leaders influence corporate culture, and build familiarity with organisational structures and their group dimensions. Let's start this lecture by taking a look at corporate culture. Corporate culture is a set of values, beliefs, goals, norms, and ways of solving problems shared by members of an organisation. Culture gives members of an organisation meaning and provides them with rules for behaving within the organisation. A company's history and unwritten rules are part of its culture. Culture can be influenced by the founder's values. Some cultures are so strong that they dictate the character of the entire organisation to outsiders. Explicit statements of values, beliefs and customs come from upper management in the form of memos, codes, handbooks, manuals, forms and ceremonies. Corporate culture is expressed informally through direct and indirect comments that convey management's wishes. It can even be expressed through dress codes, promotions, legends, and extracurricular activities. Now you know a bit more about the meaning of corporate culture. Let's now learn about the two basic dimensions that determine an organisation's culture. 1. Concern for people. For example, an organisation's efforts to care for its employees' well-being. And 2. Concern for performance. For example, the organisation's efforts to focus on output and employee productivity. Based on these two dimensions, an organisational culture can be classified into 4 different types. First, apathetic culture, which shows minimal concern for people or performance. Second, caring culture, which exhibits high concern for people but minimal concern for performance. Third, exacting culture. This shows little concern for people but high concern for performance. Fourth, integrative culture. This shows high concern for people and performance. This can be depicted via a framework of organisational culture typologies. The two dimensions are concern for people and concern for performance. Apathetic being low on both concern for people and concern for performance, and integrative are high on both dimensions. In Lecture 5, we learnt ethical decision-making is an option to choose among several actions that stakeholders would evaluate as right or wrong. Now we'll learn about corporate culture as a significant factor in ethical decision-making. If a firm's culture encourages or rewards unethical behaviour, its employees may well act unethically. An organisation's failure to monitor or manage its culture may foster questionable behaviour. Ethical issues may arise because of conflicts between the cultural values perceived by management and those actually at work in the organisation. Apart from the conflict in perceived cultural value prevailing in an organisation, another challenge in business is getting diverse people to work together efficiently and ethically while coordinating their skills. Relationships among individuals and within groups are an important part of the proper functioning of a business organisation. Interpersonal relations influence decisions about ethical issues in the following ways. 1. the corporation's responsibility as a moral agent. 2. Variation in employee conduct. And 3. Role relationships within the organisation. Let's look at the responsibility of the corporation as a moral agent. Corporations are viewed not merely as profit-making entities, but also as moral agents accountable to stakeholders. Companies are legally accountable for the conduct of their employees, as well as for decisions and consequences of those decisions. The only way to ensure consistent decisions that represent the interests of all stakeholders is to have ethical policies. Let's now discuss this second aspect of interpersonal relationships, variations in employee conduct. People are culturally diverse and have different values. They interpret situations differently and will vary in the ethical decisions they make on the same ethical issue. Organisations must recognise this variation in the employee's desire to be ethical for good business practice and adherence to law. According to research on variations in ethical conduct of employees, 10% will take advantage of situations to further their own personal interests. 40% will go along with the work group on most matters. 40% will try to follow company policies and rules and have a strong grasp of the corporate culture. And 10% maintain formal standards that focus on rights, duties and rules. The third aspect in interpersonal relationships is role relationships within an organisation. All the roles that a person plays in a company constitute his or her position, and together they prescribe the behaviour that others expect of someone in that position and help the organisation achieve its goals. Role relationships within an organisation includes the following aspects. 1. Socialisation. This refers to the process through which a person learns the values and behaviour patterns considered appropriate by an organisation or group. 2. Role sets. Role sets are the total of all role relationships in which a person is involved as a result of his or her position in an organisation. 3. Role stress. This is the strain, conflict or disruption that results from a lack of agreement on certain job-related activities. 4. Differential association. This refers to the idea that people learn ethical or unethical behaviour while interacting with others who are part of their role sets or belong to other intimate personal groups. 5. Whistleblowing. This means exposing an employer's wrongdoing to outsiders such as the media or government regulatory agencies. Legal provisions for whistleblowing include 1. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act. 2. Guidelines for publicly listed companies. 3. The Federal Sentencing Guidelines for the organisations. Let's commence our discussion with Sarbanes-Oxley Act. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act makes it illegal to discriminate against a whistleblower. Next, the Guidelines for Publicly Listed Companies directs the following. Publicly traded companies are required to implement an anonymous reporting mechanism. Now let's discuss the third type of legal provision for whistleblowing, that is, the Federal Sentencing Guidelines. The Federal Sentencing Guidelines for organisations provides rewards for companies that systemically detect and address unethical or illegal activities. 6. Organisational pressures. Pressure to achieve company goals can sometimes create ethical issues where the employee finds themselves in conflict. Conflict occurs when it's not clear which goals or values take precedence, those of the individual, the organisation or society. There are 3 types of conflict: personal organisational conflict, personal societal conflict, organisational societal conflict. Personal organisational conflict occurs when a person's individual values and methods for reaching a desired goal differ from those of the organisation or a group within the organisation. Personal societal conflict occurs when an individual's values deviate from those of society. Organisational societal conflict occurs when the norms and values of a business contravene those of society in general. We'll now learn how leaders influence corporate culture. You may recall your learning on leadership from Lecture 5. Leadership is the ability or authority to guide and direct others towards achievement of a goal. Important leaders of organisations are CEOs, top management, and boards of directors. There are two types of leaders. 1. Transactional leaders. They create employee satisfaction through negotiating for desired behaviours or levels of performance. They ensure that conduct and procedures are followed. 2. Transformational leaders. They strive to raise an employee's level of commitment and to foster trust and motivation. They communicate a sense of mission and stimulate new ways of thinking. Let's learn about the power of leaders. What is power? The influence that leaders and managers have over the behaviour and decisions of subordinates is known as power. There are 5 types of power. First, reward power. This refers to offering something desirable to influence behaviour. Second, coercive power. This refers to penalising negative behaviour. Third, legitimate power. This refers to titles and positions of authority that organisations bestow on individuals. Fourth, expert power. This is a knowledge-based power. And fifth, referent power. This exists when goals or objectives are similar. Now let's take a look at motivation. Motivation is a force within the individual that focuses on his or her behaviour towards achieving a goal. An individual's hierarchy of needs may influence his or her motivation and ethical behaviour. After basic needs such as food, working conditions or existence needs, and survival are satisfied, relatedness needs and growth needs become important. Relatedness needs are satisfied by social and interpersonal relationships. Growth needs are satisfied by creative or productive activities. Needs or goals may change as a person progresses through the ranks of the company's organisational structure. We'll now discuss the organisational structure. There are 2 broad categories of organisational structures. First, centralised organisational structure, and second, decentralised organisational structure. In centralised organisations, decision-making authority is concentrated in the hands of top-level managers and little authority is delegated to lower levels. There is a considerable distance between employee and the decision-maker. There is very little upward communication. Top-level managers may not be aware of problems and unethical activity. Another ethical issue is blame shifting. People may try to transfer blame for their actions to others who are not responsible. Let's now take a look at group dimensions. Corporate values, beliefs, patterns, and rules are often expressed through small groups within the organisation. Individual groups within organisations often adopt their own rules and values. There are 2 main categories of group dimension. 1. Formal groups. This includes committees, work groups and teams. 2. Informal groups. These help develop informal channels of communication, sometimes called the grapevine. There are 4 group norms. 1. Standards of behaviour that groups expect of their members. 2. The power to enforce a strong degree of conformity amongst group members. 3. Standards of behaviour acceptable in the group define acceptable behaviour, foster conformity and may conflict with the organisational culture. 4. Sanctions may be necessary to bring a non-conforming group into line within organisational expectations. Ethical decisions within organisations are usually not made by individuals, rather made by committees and formal and informal groups. That concludes this lecture. You'll now have knowledge on the role of corporate culture in ethical decision making. You should understand interpersonal relationships and how leaders influence corporate culture. And you should understand organisational structures and their group dimensions. Thank you for taking the time to view this lecture.